can't believe it's almost 2025. I'm sorry, I just had to get it out of my system. I know you've heard the same thing repeated by everybody and their grandmother, but I can't believe it's almost 2025. But as surprising as the passage of time is, a new year also means a ton of new books. And I don't think I have ever had such a long list of books coming out in a new year that I'm excited for before. Like, more than 30 books, 30 something books are on this list at this moment in time, and I am so excited for all of them, bearing in mind that there are probably so many other books coming out next year that I haven't even heard of yet or haven't been announced yet that I will also be excited for when I do learn about them. But in the meantime, I wanted to film this annual tradition, which is sharing my most anticipated books of the new year with you. A concept which is pretty self-explanatory. Now, most of these books come out in the first half of the year, and I am going to go through the books month by month. So I'm going to tackle the books coming out in January, February, March in order, not necessarily the days they come out in those months, but the months that they come out. And of course, it's always worth saying that these dates are subject to change. I don't work at any of these publishing houses. I have no control over when these books come out. They might change. They may also have different release dates in different countries, but these are the dates that I am working with. So yeah, I guess that pretty much covers it. And without further ado, let's talk about the books coming out in 2025 that I am so excited for. So January is actually a little bit quieter than the following months, but I do still have 3 books coming out in January that I'm looking forward to. The first of which is Lamb by Lucy Rose, which I believe is best described as a sort of literary horror novel, a feminist literary horror novel, which are absolute buzzwords for me. Like, you say those words in a row and I'm interested. And I've been following Lucy on social media for a little while now, and hearing her talk about this book and the themes of this book have got me so excited, and I know I'm not the only one, but it's a book which deals with cannibalism, and it uses cannibalism as a vehicle to explore feminism and the relationship between a mother and daughter, which is something that I find fascinating as a premise. I love when the sort of horror genre or books with slightly darker themes are used to explore kind of real life issues and things that we are perhaps experiencing around us. It's one of my favourite subgenres, shall we say, and this is a debut coming of age novel which I think is going to be on a lot of people's lips next year. We then have Outrage by Ellen Jones, which is a non-fiction book of which I'm going to read the subtitle out loud for you because I can never remember subtitles. The subtitle is Why the Fight for LGBTQ+ Equality is Not Yet Won and What We Can Do About It. So Ellen Jones, again, I've been following for a really long time, years in fact. She is an LGBTQI activist and advocate, and she's been doing amazing things online and offline for advocacy in advocacy spaces for years. So I'm really excited to see some of what she's learned put into a book, and I've heard Ellen talk about this book and some of the issues it covers, and I think it's going to be so fascinating. I know it's going to be incredibly well researched, and I really enjoy books which are structured like this, which present the problem. You know, they explore inequality, they explore discrimination, they explore what is yet to be done in society to make it better for people, and then sort of discuss what needs to be done to improve that, because I think they can take away the edge of despondency you can feel sometimes reading non-fiction and turn it on its head and give you a little bit of hope and a little bit of purpose, and perhaps will convert many others to become activists too. So super excited for this one. Then lastly we have Bemused by Farah Roshan, which is actually a Disney publication, and it is the story of the muses from Disney's Hercules. So I think this is largely, I think it's worth noting that this is a book inspired by the Disney film Hercules rather than necessarily coming straight from the position of Greek mythology, but it's obviously going to interact with Greek mythology because it's Disney's Hercules. But let's be honest, if you're a Disney's Hercules fan, then one of your favourite parts of that film has got to be the muses. The muses of Disney's Hercules are absolutely phenomenal, and I love the idea that those muses combined with the muses of ancient Greek mythology are being brought to life in a novelisation. Like, yes, please. Both child Jean and adult Jean are so excited for this book. I love Disney's Hercules, and yes, before you ask, I am gonna go see the musical on the West End in the new year. We already have tickets. So this is just going to be, I think, the year of Hercules 2025 for me. With that brief stop in January, however, we are now moving on to February, and the first book I want to talk about coming out in February is Nephthys by Rachel Louise Driscoll, and this is a book inspired by ancient Egyptian mythology. So it's not a book set in ancient Egypt, but it's set in the Victorian era, which is an era which in turn has its own historical relationship with ancient Egypt. It's when you start to see the popularity of archaeology, which has a lot of like problematic undertones, especially of that era. So I'm hoping that this book is going to be the perfect combination of Victorian archaeological history and ancient Egyptian mythology. Plus, I particularly love that it's a book inspired by and which interacts with the goddess Nephthys, because she's a goddess that often gets forgotten in favour of perhaps her more famous siblings like Isis and Osiris and Set, but she was actually married to Set and she is the mother of Anubis. So yeah, time for Nephthys to get a little bit more attention in the kind of mainstream, I think. So yeah, looking forward to that one. We then have the first sequel of this video, and that is Emily Wilde's Compendium of Lost Tales by Heather Fawcett. Now this is the third book in a series, so there's not much really to say if you haven't read the previous two books or the first book in the series, Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies, but I'm so excited. This is sort of like a cozy fantasy adventure series with a quite charming romance threaded through about a academic of fairies. Like, I mean actual fairies, not just folklore, but fairies out in the field, set in a sort of late 1800s, early 1900s setting, and I just cannot wait for the third and I believe final installment in the series. Like, these books are so wonderful, so charming, and I couldn't recommend the first one more highly if you want to get into them. We then have Hungerstone by Kat Denning, which is another book which just like ticks all my buzzwords. This is a sapphic historical fantasy retelling of Carmilla. So Carmilla, you may know, is one of the like original vampire stories, not the first vampire story, but a classic of the vampire genre, which wove vampire lore with, let's be honest, homophobia towards queer women and lesbians. But what I've loved of recent years is more women taking the story of Carmilla and reworking it as a sort of like new feminist reclamation retelling, because a man decided to vilify lesbian vampires and we've decided no, no, no. So I'm super excited for another book that kind of falls into that subgenre, which is still quite small, but I'm excited to see more books do fun things with. And I'm not gonna lie, the cover just sort of makes me that much more excited because it's stunning. Then one of the best titles from 2025 so far, as far as I'm concerned, and that is I Got Abducted by Aliens and Now I Am Trapped in a Rom-Com by Kimberly Lemming. So you may know Kimberly Lemming as the author of titles including I Yeeted a Love Potion at a Werewolf. She has the best titles. I'm sorry, like not a lot of books can pull off such long-winded titles, but she does it, and they really sort of give you a sense of what to expect, which is comedic, fast-paced, adventure-filled fantasy romances, or in this case I believe science fiction romance, because of course we have aliens. And I loved Kimberly Lemming's previous trilogy, which for me was like the epitome of fantasy romance for D&D lovers. So naturally I'm super excited for her foray into the science fiction world, and I love that title, so yeah, give me, give me, give me. Sorry, that previous title was I Got Drunk and Yeeted a Love Potion at a Werewolf. I missed out the first part. Another retelling, because it's me, that's coming out in February 2025 is Green Teeth by Molly O'Neill, which is inspired by the British folktale of Jenny Greenteeth, who's actually a swamp monster who is the bad guy of fairy tale and folklore. You know, she draws people into the swamp and leads them to their demise. So this is two things I love, which is a retelling of a British folktale, which I'm so desperate for more of, and B, a retelling from the perspective of the bad guy, of the villain. And I'm really excited to see how the author reworks this story and sort of takes us down the rabbit hole that is Jenny Greenteeth. Cannot wait. We then have some more non-fiction, and that is The Message by Ta-Nehisi Coates, which is a exploration of 3 specific conflicts in tandem, and I assume one which will both go into depth on these 3 conflicts as well as sort of like draw parallels and explore what they tell us just more generally. I feel like it's the kind of book where I can't hazard what it's going to say, but I think I'm going to really get something from it and take something away from it, and it's talking about issues that are really important. So the 3 sites of conflict it's looking at are Dakar, South Carolina and Palestine. Then we have a literary thriller which is Snake Oil by Kelsey Ray Dimberg, which is about the head of or CEO of a beauty company who, you know, like pride themselves and all their sort of like amazing ethics and probably natural ingredients, what have you, and they've got this whole like PR spiel when things start taking a bit of a nosedive for them, and the CEO, because an anonymous Twitter account starts up that is revealing secrets about both the company and the CEO, and I think this is going to be a really, really interesting examination of the contemporary beauty industry via a thriller, so looking forward to that. Then last but not least, for February, it's actually a book which I don't know when it's going to be released in the UK, but it comes out in Australia in February, and you better believe I'm going to find a way to get a copy because it's Juliet Marilliers' new book. So Juliet Marillier is one of my favourite authors of all time. She generally writes ancient and medieval inspired fantasy novels, so it's like historical fantasy with phenomenal strong female characters and beautiful prose, so I'm really excited to see what she does next. So yeah, I don't care where this book is coming out, I need to read it because I love her so much. I don't even care what the book is about, I need to read it because I love her so much. Oh, and if I didn't mention already, it's called The Amber Owl. Okay, I got my coffee and now it is time to talk about March. So March is actually another smaller month and I literally only had 2 books to talk about, but they are both excellent books. And the first one is actually a classic, so in a sense this is not entirely a new release. The text within this volume existed long before 2025, but this looks like such an interesting compendium put together by Penguin Classics called Women in Power. Classical myths and stories from the Amazons to Cleopatra. So yeah, this is so up my street. This is bringing together texts, stories, tales, myths, historical tidbits about women in power from antiquity, and that is obviously something I'm always super interested in. Then book 2 for March is Do You Ship It, which is a YA rom-com by Beth Reekles, and like the premise of this novel just sounds like everything. It is basically a love letter to online fan culture in the form of a YA rom-com, and it's about a girl who's in love with a boy at school, and she decides to get into his fandom in order to sort of bond with him, but then ends up bonding with somebody else online through this fandom and learning about it, and actually finds out that this fandom can mean something to her as an individual, as well as finding this romantic connection. Obviously I can't say where it's all going to lead, but I love the premise and I love the kind of nostalgia but also contemporary relevance. Obviously online fan culture is still very, very much a thing, but it kind of takes me back to being a teenager myself, so yeah, I'm really looking forward to that one. I take that back. The next book I was going to talk to you about I thought came out in April. It actually comes out in March, so even better. So we actually have another book for March, and that is Just Our Luck by Denise Williams, which is an adult rom-com, and for me 2024 has been the year of contemporary rom-coms. Like, I had read obviously contemporary romances before 2024, but I feel like I thoroughly enmeshed myself in that genre this past year and really found some favourites, and I've just become more excited to read more, so I'm really excited to see some of the rom-coms that are coming out next year, and this one sounds fantastic. It is about a woman who is down on her luck in a certain sense. Like, life is a little bit chaotic and not going the way she wants, but she has just enough money to buy a lottery ticket, and then she goes into this bakery which also isn't having the best time. It's a family bakery and this guy has taken over from his family, and she then forgets her winning lottery ticket, because yes, it's a winning one, behind at his bakery, and he, being the good guy that he is, sets out on a bit of like a social media campaign to find her, to give her back her lottery ticket, which in turn makes his bakery go viral and they fall in love. I don't know, it's a romance. I cannot wait. Love the premise. So the first April release I am super excited for is actually non-fiction. It's a history book, and that is Fulvia, the woman who broke all the rules in ancient Rome by Jane Draycott. So again, followed Jane Draycott for years. She's a historian and a scholar whose content I really enjoy, and I am so excited for this book. And I am so excited for this book, which naturally deals with the life of Fulvia, who was at one time married to Mark Antony and Empress of Rome, but who was a powerful and bold, loud figure of history in her own right. And despite the fact that I did not love the course on Roman empresses during my undergraduate degree, I'm really enjoying revisiting them now as an adult. We then have Vanishing World by Sayaka Murata. So I've read 2 books by this author in the past, Convenience Store Women, which I loved, and Earthlings, which I think I'm still recovering from more than half a decade after reading, because it was so intense, disturbing, if still incredibly interesting. But despite those books being quite different tonally, or at least in the level of darkness, they actually deal with similar things, which is kind of about expected societal roles and fitting in and not fitting in, and that's something I think this book is also going to be dealing with, so I'm intrigued to see what route it goes down. But it's set in a future world where nobody is conceived through intercourse anymore. Everybody is artificially conceived, and in fact to have sex is something that is not done. It is seen as very taboo, and I think that's a really interesting premise. Then for April we have a debut adult fantasy novel that I am so excited for. This is an author I've read before, but their YA work, and this is their first ever adult fantasy book, which, oh, it just sounds phenomenal, and that is Georgia Layton's Spellbound. So this is a reimagining, or a novel inspired by the fairy tale of Sleeping Beauty, with a feminist twist. So rather than following some of the popular beats that we are familiar with when it comes to Sleeping Beauty, where Aurora is asleep for most of the story, and a prince comes along and saves her. Of course, there's nothing wrong with that version, but we follow 3 women in this story who are basically trying to undo the curse that a princess has been placed under, and I love that idea. Then lastly for April we have She's a Lamb by Meredith Hambrock. So this is a dark comedy, I believe. It's a satire of the sort of contemporary film industry. That's rude phone. It's a satirical novel about one woman who is desperate for fame at all costs, who has been, you know, like beaten down by the patriarchy, but is determined to become a big star. However, I'm not sure if she's going to end up doing some slightly strange things to get there in this novel, and I love the idea of a dark comedy. Like, I feel like I don't read enough dark comedy, but I love watching dark comedy films, so I need more dark comedy books. And then we are in May. So the first 2 books actually I am going to mention to you are books that I edited because of course I'm excited for them to come out, and these are 2 more volumes I've edited in the Macmillan Collectors Library series. So Macmillan Collectors Library is an imprint at Pan Macmillan in the UK which focuses on classics, and they publish both like full-length sort of novels with introductions by various people, as well as anthologies compiled by different people. And in the past I have worked on 4 previous anthologies, 2 on Greek myths, 1 on dragons from around the world, and 1 on witches from around the world. And in May of 2025 I have 2 more volumes coming out, 1 on fairies, elves and sprites from around the world, and 1 on mermaids, sirens and selkies from around the world. And I am just really proud of these. I obviously think a lot of every story that's in here because I chose them from doing a bit of a deep dive on both subjects and sort of scanning through and reading all of the like old fairy tale, folktale and mythology collections I could get my hands on, some of which are now out of print, and brought them together in these volumes, as well as introducing them and giving a little bit of a historical context to the ideas and terms that they discuss. And yeah, I think they're really interesting collections. I think the stories are fantastic. There's some fantastic authors in there, and if you're into fairy tales, folktales, mythology or legends, then check them out. Side note, those are not the only books I have coming out in May 2025, but technically I'm supposed to be waiting until January to do the official announcement, so watch this space. We then have another non-fiction title, and that is The New Age of Sexism by Laura Bates, subtitled How the AI Revolution is is reinventing misogyny. So I think Laura Bates is a phenomenal author. She writes feminist non-fiction about women's lives in the 21st century. She's written books on everyday sexism, about misogyny in online communities, about the media and misogyny, and I think her books are incredibly accessible. I think they make these subjects so accessible whether you are somebody who's experienced this stuff or not, and I'm really excited to see her take an analysis and overview of the intersection between AI and misogyny. So yeah, cannot wait for that, although it's going to be a hard read, I'm sure. We then have the first in a fantasy series written by fellow Scot Hazel McBride, and that is A Fate Forged in Fire, the first in the Bonded to Beast series. Again, I've been following Hazel online for quite a long time, and it's been really nice to see the process of this book getting to publication, and I'm so excited to finally read it after, like, you know, following along on that journey. Like I said, it's the first in a fantasy series with, I believe, a slow burn romance, and I think one which sort of, you know, draws on bits of like Scottish folklore, because, you know, that's Hazel's background, like mine, you know, that's what we grew up with. Still on the fantasy side, particularly the romantasy side, we have The Night and the Moth by Rachel Gillig, and this one is about Sybil, who is a diviner, or basically a Sybil, a oracle, somebody who can see the future, and that is her role in this world, except that others like her, other diviners, have started to go missing, and she needs to find them with the help of, you know, a brooding young man that, you know, she might fancy him. Then lastly for me, we have a YA fantasy novel from one of my favourite contemporary adult romance writers. So a divergence from what I've read from them in the past, but I love their writing, so I'm really excited to see what they do in this space, and that is Illusions of Fire by Nisha Sharma. So I'm familiar with Nisha Sharma not just because I follow her online, but because I've read her Dating Dr. Dill books, which are fantastic. Well, I haven't read the most recent one, but so far I'm loving the series, and this is her debut YA fantasy. And this is a contemporary story about a girl named Layla who has some mythological connections. Specifically, I think this story is in part inspired by the Mahabharata, which is a Hindu epic, and unsurprisingly I love me a contemporary take on historical and mythological stories, so cannot wait for this one. Now I'm actually surprised to say that in June there's only one book currently on my radar, but it is a very exciting book, and that is Scotch on the Rocks by Elliot Fletcher, which is the second book in the McCabe Brothers series. So this is a contemporary romance series set on the Isle of Skye in Scotland, and I read book one this year quite recently with my partner, which is called Whiskey Business, and adored it. One of the best contemporary romances I've ever read, and not just because it's set in Scotland. I loved this book. It was so charming. I loved the characters. I loved the backdrop and the detail around sort of the whiskey business, which is at the heart of the book, and just everything. Elliot Fletcher delivered both like complex, rich characters as well as a rich backdrop to their stories. So I love that, and naturally I'm very excited to read the story of the second McCabe brother, Callum, in this book. Okay, so now we're into July. I have no idea how long this video is at this point, but the first book on my list for July is by one of my favourite authors, and that is Lisa Jo's new thriller, Don't Let Him In. So again, this is one that's very much on my list because of the author. I have read so many Lisa Jo thrillers in the past and adored them that I am going to read anything she brings out in the future. Like, that's just it. But this one specifically, I believe, is about like a sort of toxic relationship where this woman gets involved with this man. He has moved into her house, and then she realises that maybe she should have never let him in the first place, hence the title. Carrying on with the thriller theme from another favourite thriller author, we have Holly Jackson's new book, Not Quite Dead Yet. But what is special about this book is that it's an adult thriller. So Holly Jackson is best known for her Good Girls Guide to Murder series, which I've read. I also loved the reappearance of Rachel Price, which are all YA thrillers, but this is her first foray into the adult thriller world, which is so exciting, and I can really like sort of see how that journey has commenced, because like the reappearance of Rachel Price very much felt like an older YA bridge to adult from A Good Girl's Guide to Murder. So yeah, I'm so excited to read an adult thriller by Holly Jackson. Then hands down, one of my favourite covers of 2025 is from Medievally Blonde by Kate Jacobs. So this is actually a medieval fantasy romance, I believe, for the upper end of YA and adult, which is loosely inspired by Legally Blonde. Like, I love it. conceptually phenomenal, and that cover is everything. I will say there's actually a ton of gorgeous covers on this list, and that also goes for the next book, which is Needfire by N.K. Hardy, which I believe is a pseudonym for two women who write together. So this is a dual authored sapphic gothic, historical gothic, which yes please. And I love when my gothic novels have sapphic characters in them, not to mention it's set in Scotland, which is another big bonus for me. And then lastly for July we have the latest novel by Silvia Moreno Garcia, which is Bewitching. So again, another author I've read before and really loved, and I love the sound of her new book. This I believe is a multiple timeline, multiple generation, you know, novel, so we're following three women across time from different generations of this family, and it is a fantastical horror novel, which yes, I mean, I loved Mexican Gothic, which also fell into the horror subgenre, so like, of course I'm interested in this one. I also have to say I love multiple timeline novels. I love a book where you've got part of the story happening in the present and part of the story happening in the past. Really love that as a structure for a novel. Then the anticipated releases do start to dwindle a little bit as we're in the second half of the year, but there are two which I'm interested in coming out in August. The first of which is Beautiful Evil by B. Fitzgerald, aka Kalon Kakon. So if you're familiar with the myth of Pandora from Greek mythology, you'll know that Pandora is described as Kalon Kakon in ancient Greek texts, which translates to beautiful evil, where the title of this novel obviously comes from. B. Fitzgerald thus far in her career has very much done really interesting things with Greek myths. She really embraces what I love about mythology, which is that it can mean something to each new generation and that it has relevancy to each new generation, and she pulls that out. So I'm excited to see what she does with this story, which focuses on the relationship between Pandora and Epimetheus, who's Pandora's husband. Not a relationship that we often see explored in fiction, so really excited for that. And then we have Isabel Canas' new book, which is called The Possession of Alba Diaz, and this is a historical gothic horror about a woman who's being possessed. I read The Hacienda by this author either earlier this year or at the end of the year before. I forget exactly when it was, but I really enjoyed it. It was another historically rooted horror which had a very immersive historical backdrop, and her writing in particular was something I very much enjoyed about the book. Like, I loved the way she painted the historical picture in the backdrop to her books, so I'm excited to see what she does in this one, which for reference is set in a Mexican silver mine in the 1700s. So those are my August releases, and then I have one more book on my list which actually comes out in October, and that is The Unmagical Life of Briar Jones by Lex Croucher, which is the first adult fantasy novel by Lex, who you may know as the author of Infamous or Gwen and Art. And I'm really excited to see what Lex does in this space particularly, because I think they're going to be quite subversive with some of the tropes of fantasy. We specifically have a main character who wants to get into the magical school but doesn't get accepted into the magical school, and I think that's something we need to see explored more. So yeah, that brings me to the end of my most anticipated releases of 2025 video. As I warned you, there were quite a few books on this list, so I hope there's at least one that maybe you're interested in too. I will have them all linked down below as always. But even though my list is already long, I would love to hear from you about any books you're excited for, whether it's because it's by your favourite author or a genre you love to read, or because you especially think I will like it and I just haven't come across it yet. Please do let me know in the comments down below, and until next time, happy reading. I'll see you all again soon. Bye everyone.